I'm 69 years old, and for the last 21 years, I've been carrying a secret that would make most people think I'm completely insane. In 2003, I found a wounded creature starving near my off-grid cabin in the northern woods after a brutal early winter storm. They weren't bears. They weren't wolves. They were something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. For 20 years, I fed it, treated its injuries, and managed a routine that slowly became my entire life. And then one night in 2023, everything changed when men in unmarked jackets walked out of the trees. What happened after that still wakes me up drenched in sweat, replaying every mistake I ever made. I kept feeding logs, veterinary notes, trail camera footage, and soil samples hidden in sealed containers under my floor. Some were taken. One copy remains buried. This is my confession before I die alone. November 2024, present day. My name is Harold Boone. I'm telling you this plainly because I don't have energy left for dramatics. The oncologist gave me 4 to 6 months back in August after I collapsed during a volunteer winter patrol shift. Stage 4 colon cancer. The kind that doesn't respond well to treatment at my age. I've declined aggressive intervention. What's the point? I spent 33 years as a Wisconsin conservation officer before I retired in 2007. Predator management mostly, tracking problem bears, investigating illegal wolf kills, documenting winter die-offs. I was good at my job, meticulous. I kept detailed logs, took precise measurements, followed protocol. The kind of officer who testified in court and never got cross-examined successfully because my documentation was airtight. Before that, I did 4 years in the Army during the Vietnam era. Never saw combat. Logistics mostly, moving supplies, coordinating shipments, dealing with things nobody wanted to think about too hard. It taught me how to keep secrets, how to compartmentalize, how to do what needed doing without asking too many questions. I bought the land in 1998, 6 years after my divorce was finalized. 40 acres of dense forest bordering state land, accessible only by a 2-mile logging road that becomes impassable most winters. My son stopped talking to me around that time. He thought I was running away. Maybe I was. For decades, I dismissed Dogman folklore as campfire stories. Every region has them, creatures that blur the line between human understanding and wilderness mystery. My job required skepticism, evidence-based conclusions. I'd investigated dozens of supposed Dogman sightings over the years. Every single one had a rational explanation. Misidentified bears, coyotes seen at odd angles, shadows, and wishful thinking. I thought experience made you smarter. Mostly, it just makes you stubborn. The diagnosis changed something fundamental. Time became finite in a way it never had been before. Secrets I'd kept for 2 decades started feeling like weights I couldn't carry to the grave. Someone needs to know what I did. Not for forgiveness. I'm way past caring what people think. But because what happened out there in those woods needs to be documented, understood, prevented from happening again. December 3, 2003. The cold that winter came early and hit hard. The kind that burned your lungs when you breathed deep, made snow squeak under your boots. I'd been getting reports of livestock losses. 3 sheep taken from a farm 8 miles from my property. A calf found eviscerated near the county line. Normal predation patterns for wolves or bears, except the timing was wrong. Too late in the season. The attacks were too aggressive, too wasteful. I was following up on my own time, already semi-retired, but still consulting. Found a blood trail that didn't make sense. Too much volume, wrong color in the snow. Darker than deer. I followed it for nearly 2 miles into a steep ravine where the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. That's when I found it. The creature was caught in an old steel cable snare, the kind poachers use for bears. Illegal as hell, but common enough in remote areas. The snare had cinched around its left foreleg just above what I'd later recognize as a wrist joint. It had clearly been there for days, maybe longer. The surrounding snow was churned to pink slush from its struggles. My first thought, and I swear this is true, was that it was a malformed black bear, some genetic abnormality that had twisted its proportions into something grotesque. That assumption lasted maybe 3 seconds. The creature's head swung toward me, and I got my first clear look. Wolf-like skull structure, yes, but the muzzle was too short, too compressed. The skull dome was too pronounced, suggesting brain capacity beyond any canid species I'd ever studied. The ears stood upright, large and independently mobile, tracking sounds even in its obvious distress. But it was the body that made my training completely irrelevant. This thing was built for bipedal locomotion. The hind legs were too long, too muscular. Articulated at angles that suggested upright posture was default, not occasional. The trapped forelimb had 5 distinct digits. Elongated, yes. Fur-covered, yes. But functional fingers with an opposable thumb that was currently wrapped around the cable, trying to work it loose. The eyes found mine. Amber-colored, reflective, but with a depth of focus that went beyond simple animal awareness. It wasn't just seeing me. It was evaluating me, calculating threat level, searching for intention beyond movement. I had 3 options standing there in that ravine. Report it, bring in state wildlife management, turn this into something public and uncontrollable. Euthanize it, the humane choice for a suffering animal, or walk away. I chose none of those. I spent the next 4 hours rigging a containment system using cable and the creature's own exhaustion. Got it free from the snare, herded it, and that's the right word because it understood direction and consequence, into an old logging shed on the back section of my property. The shed had been used for equipment storage decades ago, solid construction, railroad ties for framing. By the time I got it secured, night had fallen completely. I was exhausted, my hands were shaking, and standing outside that shed, hearing the creature move inside, I had my first clear thought about what I'd just done. I should have known no good decision starts with secrecy. That first night I barely slept, just sat in my cabin with every light on, listening to the forest, half expecting to hear the shed come apart. Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to rest and went to check the containment. The creature was lying in the far corner, conscious but clearly weakened. Its injured foreleg was swollen, already showing signs of infection around where the cable had cut through fur and skin. In wildlife biology, we know that trap injuries often turn septic within 48 hours without treatment. This looked like it was already past that window. I went back to the cabin and gathered what I had: antibiotic ointment meant for horses, clean rags, a bucket of water, venison from my freezer, bone marrow, electrolyte powder I used for my hunting dogs before they died. The creature watched me approach. Every muscle in its body was tense, but it didn't vocalize, didn't show teeth, just watched with those impossible eyes. I set the food and water down about 6 feet away, then backed up to the door, waited. After maybe 5 minutes, it moved. Not on all fours like a wolf would. It sat up, shifting its weight onto its haunches, then reached forward with its good arm. The way it picked up the venison, fingers curling around the meat, thumb providing opposition. That's when I knew for certain this wasn't any kind of animal I'd been trained to understand. It ate slowly, deliberately. When it finished, it dipped its hand into the water bucket and drank from its cupped palm. Then it did something that I still see when I close my eyes. It looked directly at me, shifted its weight, and sat down in almost the exact posture I was using, back against the wall, legs bent, one arm resting across its knee. Mirroring behavior is rare outside highly social species. Primates do it, dolphins, some bird species. It indicates complex social cognition, the ability to recognize and replicate another being's physical state as a form of communication. I left the shed that night without making any attempt to treat the wound. I wasn't ready, didn't have the right equipment. Those were the excuses I told myself. The truth was simpler. I was terrified. I didn't name it. Names make things personal, make them harder to let go when the time comes. I'd learned that from 3 decades of wildlife work. Never name what you might have to euthanize. Over the next week, I managed to clean and treat the wound by leaving supplies where it could reach them and watching through the gaps in the shed walls. The swelling went down. The infection seemed to respond to the antibiotics. By day 10, the creature was putting weight on the limb again. I kept asking myself the same question. What the hell was I doing playing veterinarian to a nightmare? I didn't have a good answer then. I still don't. By the end of the first month, we'd established a routine. I'd arrive at the shed every evening just before dusk with food and fresh water. The creature would be waiting, always in the same spot, always in that sitting position that made it look disturbingly human from certain angles. I started tracking caloric intake, rough estimates based on consumption rates and obvious energy expenditure, somewhere around 12,000 calories per day. More when it was cold, mostly raw meat, venison, rabbit, whatever I could hunt or buy without raising questions. I supplemented with marrow bones, organ meat, occasionally fish. The feeding times became fixed points in my life. Everything else had to work around them. I was still doing consulting work for the State Wildlife Department, mostly desk analysis and report review. I made sure to schedule everything so I could be back at the property by 4 p.m. every single day without exception. People noticed. Of course they noticed. My supervisor at the time, Jim Hardesty, called me in for a conversation in March 2004. "Harold, you've turned down 3 field assignments in the last 2 months. You leave here every day at exactly 3:45. You used to be the guy who'd stay late, help with overflow work. What's going on?" I told him I was working on my property, building a cabin addition. It wasn't technically a lie. I had reinforced the shed, added better ventilation, installed a stronger door with a lock the creature couldn't reach. But it wasn't the truth either. "You need to ease up," Jim said. "Whatever project you've got going, it'll still be there tomorrow." But it wouldn't. That was the thing. If I missed even one evening, the creature would know, would react. I'd seen it test the doorframe on nights when I arrived later than usual, not in panic, methodically. Testing stress points, looking for weaknesses. By month 3, the creature had reached what I assumed was full size. 7.5 feet standing fully upright, which I'd witnessed exactly once when it stretched after eating. Weight I estimated around 340 pounds, based on how it moved, how deep its footprints pressed into soft ground. Pure muscle, no excess fat. The injury had healed, but not correctly. The wrist joint didn't articulate quite right anymore. It compensated, used the limb differently. I felt a sharp pang of guilt watching that. Professional failure. I'd treated hundreds of animals over my career. This one I'd botched. Around that time, I started seeing someone. Linda worked at the hardware store in town. Nice woman, divorced, 2 grown kids, looking for companionship more than romance. We'd have dinner twice a week, usually at her place, because I couldn't risk her coming to mine. After 6 weeks, she asked the inevitable question. "Why can't I see where you live?" I made excuses. Property's a mess, doing construction, embarrassed about the state of things. She smiled, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The relationship lasted another month before she ended it. "I don't know what you're hiding, Harold," she said, "and honestly, I don't think I want to know. But you're not ready for any kind of real relationship." "Maybe you never will be." She was right. That's when my world started shrinking. By December 2004, 1 year into this impossible commitment, I documented changes I couldn't explain and patterns I shouldn't have been able to observe. The creature had established territorial markers around my property, not scent marking like wolves or bears, Deliberate arrangements of objects, rocks stacked in specific patterns, branches twisted into shapes that were too precise to be natural. I found them along the property boundaries, always in places where sight lines were clear, where the forest opened up. Deer trails that had cut through my land for years simply stopped. The animals rerouted entirely, adding sometimes a mile to their movement patterns just to avoid the area. Saplings that had been browsed to death every winter started surviving. The whole forest structure began shifting. I was entering notes about all of this in a journal I kept hidden under the floorboards in my bedroom. Measurements, behavioral observations, dietary details. All the things I'd have documented in an official capacity if I'd been able to report this through proper channels. But I couldn't. I'd crossed too many lines. Maintained an undocumented species in captivity. Failed to report a discovery that would rewrite textbooks. Every day that passed made it harder to imagine a scenario where I came forward without facing serious legal consequences. I tried dating again that spring, met a woman named Sarah through church. She was patient, understanding about my need for privacy. But 6 weeks in, she wanted to spend more time at my place, wanted to see my life, not just the version I showed her in restaurants and movie theaters. "What are you protecting out there?" she asked me. "What's so important that you can't let anyone in?" Normal people don't live like this. The thought circled my brain constantly. Normal people have relationships, build lives, share their space with others. I was doing none of that. I was choosing isolation, choosing this creature over any chance at human connection. The near discovery came in February during a cold snap that dropped temperatures to 15 below. I heard snowmobile engines on the logging road that led to my property around 8 p.m., long after dark, which meant either emergency or trespassing. I went out to intercept them before they got close to the shed. 2 guys from town, drunk, looking for trails to run. They'd wandered onto my land by accident, but they were only about 200 yards from the containment area. "You need to leave," I said. "Private property." "We're just passing through, man. Relax." From somewhere behind me, deeper in the woods, came a sound. Low, resonant, not quite a growl, not quite a vocalization. Something in between that made the hair on my neck stand up, even though I'd heard variations of it dozens of times. The snowmobilers heard it too. Went quiet. What the hell was that? "Wolves," I said. "Been a packed inning near here. They don't like engines. You should go." They left fast. But I spent the next 3 months terrified that they'd mention it to someone, that curious hunters or wildlife photographers would start sniffing around. I stopped sleeping well, lost weight, developed arthritis in my hands. From the cold, from the constant work of maintaining containment and secrecy. Looking back, all the warning signs were there. I should have recognized what this was doing to me. I was wrong. Feeding something 12,000 calories per day for years required logistics most people can't fathom. I was spending close to $800 a month on meat alone by year 3. I bought from different sources, rotated suppliers, always paid cash. Started processing my own deer to supplement. Hunted more than was probably legal on my own land, but who was going to stop me? The creature's intelligence became impossible to ignore somewhere around year 4. I'd watch it manipulate objects through the shed walls, using rocks to crack open the marrow bones I provided, getting every last bit of nutrition. That's tool use, deliberate, purposeful tool use. Its memory was perfect. It recognized the sound of my truck from at least half a mile away. I could tell because on nights when I was running late, it would already be positioned near the door when I arrived, as if it had been tracking my approach from the moment I turned onto the logging road. The vocalizations developed structure, different sounds for different situations. A low rumble when I was late, a higher pitched sound, almost questioning, when I brought unfamiliar food. Silence when I was on time, when everything matched expectation. In my 33 years as a conservation officer, I'd studied predator behavior extensively. This went beyond anything in my training. This was communication. Not language exactly, but complex enough to convey specific meaning. I met someone else in year 5, Jessica, nurse from the regional hospital. She was different from the others, didn't push as hard about my privacy, seemed comfortable with boundaries. We dated for almost 4 months, started to feel like maybe I could balance both parts of my life. Then she said the thing that ended it, "What are you hiding out there?" We were sitting in her apartment. I'd canceled our dinner plans 3 times that month because of issues with the containment, damage to the doorframe, signs the creature was testing its boundaries more aggressively. "I'm not hiding anything," I said. "I just value my privacy." "Harold, you're 63 years old. You have no friends. Your son won't talk to you. You spend every evening alone on that property doing God knows what. That's not privacy. That's isolation. And I don't think I can watch you disappear into it." She was crying when she said it. I wanted to tell her everything, wanted to explain that I wasn't crazy, wasn't dangerous, wasn't doing anything illegal in the way she might be imagining. But how could I? How do you explain this? The relationship ended that night. I turned down a consulting position with the State Wildlife Department that year. Good money, flexible hours, a chance to stay relevant in my field. But it would have required field travel, overnight trips. I couldn't risk it. "You sure?" Jim asked me when I declined. "This feels like a step backward, Harold." It was, but I was in too deep to step forward. The creature was aging by year 6. Slower, more deliberate movements. Gray starting to show in the fur around its muzzle. I found myself worrying about it. What would happen when it got old? What would I do if it got sick again? Too sick for basic antibiotics and hope. I convinced myself the aggression was just a phase, that the boundary testing was natural, that I still had control. That was mistake number 1. Town gossip about me shifted from curious to concerned somewhere around year 8. "Prepper," I heard someone say once in the grocery store. Probably building one of those bunker things. Someone else thought I was running a meth lab. A deputy I'd worked with years ago actually asked me about it directly. "Harold, you doing okay out there?" "Fine," I said, "just like my privacy." "I get that, but people talk. You've gotten isolated. If you ever need anything, I'm fine," I repeated. The near exposure that almost ended everything happened in October 2010, just after dark on a Tuesday. 2 hunters had pursued a wounded buck onto my property, following blood trail without realizing they'd crossed the boundary. They were maybe 50 yards from the shed when I intercepted them. "Private property," I said, keeping my voice level. "You need to leave." "We hit a deer," one of them said. "Big buck. Blood trail leads right." From the direction of the shed came a sound that froze all 3 of us. Not loud, but deep. A rumble that carried weight, that resonated in your chest. The kind of sound that triggers something primal in human nervous systems. "What the hell is that?" the second hunter said. His hand moved toward the rifle slung over his shoulder. "Wolves," I said immediately. "Department knows about them. Den's near here. You need to go. Now." That didn't sound like wolves. "You're on private property. I'm asking you nicely one time. After that, I call the sheriff about trespassing hunters." They left. But I saw one of them looking back over his shoulder, saw the doubt in his face. I spent the next 6 months in a state of constant anxiety, waiting for someone to show up asking questions, for wildlife management to get reports about strange sounds, for anything that would unravel 2,000 days of secrecy. Nothing happened. But the panic attack I had that night left me shaking for hours. I told myself I was in control. That was a lie. My health started declining noticeably around year 10. The arthritis in my hands got worse. I developed sleep apnea, probably from stress and weight gain from spending all my time sedentary or doing manual labor. Started having blood pressure issues. A doctor put me on medication and suggested lifestyle changes. You're 66 years old, Harold. You need to think about slowing down, maybe moving somewhere easier to manage than an off-grid cabin. I smiled and nodded and knew I'd never follow that advice. The creature was aging too, moving slower. I'd see it favoring its right hip sometimes, the same way old wolves do when arthritis sets in. The gray in its muzzle had spread. Its eyes still tracked me with perfect focus, but the overall energy level had declined. I started wondering what I'd do when it died. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like grief. Year 18, March 2021. COVID-19 had turned the world strange, but my routine hadn't changed. Same feeding schedule, same isolation. The pandemic just made my lifestyle seem less abnormal. Then I got sick, not COVID. Diverticulitis that went septic before I recognized what was happening. By the time I drove myself to the hospital, I was running a 104-degree fever and could barely stand. They kept me for 6 days. IV antibiotics, surgery to remove a section of infected bowel. The whole time I was there, all I could think about was the creature. 6 days without feeding, without the routine we'd maintained for nearly 2 decades. I checked myself out against medical advice as soon as I could walk without assistance. Drove home with my abdomen full of staples, probably still running a fever. The damage was obvious before I even reached the shed. The door frame was buckled, not broken, buckled, bent inward where pressure had been systematically applied at the weakest structural points. The creature hadn't escaped in panic. It had dismantled its containment with precision. Inside, the feeding area was destroyed. Water buckets overturned, deep gouges in the wooden walls where claws had tested the integrity of support beams. The creature was there, waiting. When it saw me, it made a sound I'd never heard before. Sharp, aggressive, something between a bark and a roar. I backed away slowly. Every instinct from my training said to stay calm, avoid sudden movements, don't trigger a chase response. It followed me out of the shed, not attacking, following. When I stopped, it stopped, maintaining distance of maybe 15 feet. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I was sick. I couldn't come." The creature tilted its head, that gesture I'd seen hundreds of times. But this time, instead of curiosity, it felt like assessment, like it was calculating whether I was still useful, still worth tolerating. I went to the cabin, got food from the freezer, brought it back. The creature ate, but it didn't return to the shed. It stayed outside, moving to the tree line, watching me. That was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. Over the next 18 months, the dynamic shifted. The creature spent less time in containment. Some nights it wasn't there at all. I'd find tracks leading off into state forest land, sometimes miles away. It always came back for feeding, but the dependence had changed. It was making choices now. Testing independence. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt abandoned. In November 2022, I tripped on ice near the cabin and fell hard. The creature was there within minutes. Must have heard me fall. It approached closer than it had in months. Close enough that I could hear it breathing. I stood up slowly, pain shooting through my hip. The creature didn't move, just watched. Then it reached out with one massive hand and touched my shoulder. Not aggressive, not gentle either, just contact, acknowledgement. The claws left 4 shallow gouges through my jacket and shirt, not deep enough to need stitches, but deep enough to scar. At the hospital, I said it was a bear encounter. They believed me, gave me antibiotics, updated my tetanus shot, sent me home with wound care instructions. What the hell was I supposed to do? Tell them the truth? Say I'd been illegally harboring an unknown species for nearly 20 years and finally got hurt because I was losing control? Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. January 17th, 2023. Temperature at 17 degrees. Clear sky. No moon. I didn't hear the vehicles approach. That's what scares me most, looking back. Professional operation. They waited until I was in the feeding routine, completely focused on the creature, vulnerable. The first indication was lights, harsh white LED floods that turned night into day. The creature reacted instantly, spun toward the light source, dropped to all fours, positioned itself between me and the threat. 3 men stepped into the clearing. Not police, not wildlife management. Unmarked dark jackets, no visible badges or identification. One carried what looked like a tranquilizer rifle. Mr. Boone. The voice was calm, professional. We need you to step away from the animal. Who are you? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That's not important. What's important is that you've been harboring an undocumented species for approximately 20 years. We need you to step away so we can secure it safely. The creature made a sound. Low. Warning. Its muscles were coiled, ready to either fight or run. How did you... Trail cameras, thermal satellite imaging. We've known for about 6 years. Been monitoring, waiting to see how the situation developed. The man with the tranquilizer gun raised it slightly. Not aiming yet, just ready. We're not here to hurt either of you, but we need to contain the animal, study it. This is bigger than you understand. No? I stepped between them and the creature. Stupid, reckless. But after 20 years, what else could I do? The second man moved to flank us. The creature tracked him perfectly, head swiveling, calculating angles. Mr. Boone, you're not thinking clearly. This animal is dangerous. You've done an admirable job keeping it hidden, but that ends tonight. The creature bolted. One moment it was behind me, the next it was in full sprint, moving on all fours with a speed that seemed impossible for something its size. The man with the tranquilizer fired. I heard the compression of the rifle, saw the dart fly wide as the creature dodged at the last possible instant. Then it was gone, into the forest, into darkness so complete that the LED floods couldn't penetrate. The men pursued. I heard them crashing through brush, shouting coordinates to each other. I stood in the clearing, legs shaking, realizing that everything I'd built and protected for 2 decades had just come apart in under 3 minutes. They came back 40 minutes later, empty-handed. Lost the trail at the creek, one of them said. Thermal can't pick it up. Too cold. It'll turn up again. The one who'd done most of the talking approached me. Mr. Boone, we're going to need to search your property. Documents, photographs, biological samples, anything related to the animal. I couldn't stop them. Didn't try. They spent 4 hours going through my cabin, took the journals from under the floorboards, took my trail camera footage, took tissue samples I'd collected from shed fur. What they didn't find was the backup set, the duplicate journals and photographs I'd buried in a waterproof container 300 yards into the forest, marked only by a cairn of rocks I could recognize but looked natural enough to escape notice. It wasn't evil, what they did. It was consequence. I'd violated every protocol, broken every rule, maintained an unknown apex predator in secret for 20 years. What did I expect would happen? They left around 4 a.m., told me they'd be in touch, told me not to discuss this with anyone, told me the creature would be located and secured for its own safety and mine. I haven't seen any of them since. I spent the next 3 days searching, called in sick to the volunteer work I'd been doing with the county wildlife office, covered every trail within 5 miles of my property, found tracks twice, 18-inch prints in snow, distinctive claw marks, stride length of approximately 6 feet. Both trails led to rocky areas where tracking became impossible. On the 4th day, I went back to the feeding location with venison. Set it out at the usual time. Waited until midnight. Nothing. I did the same thing every night for 2 weeks. The meat would be gone by morning, but I never saw what took it. Could have been bears, waking early from hibernation. Could have been coyotes. Could have been the creature approaching only after I left. The hope that it was still alive, still nearby, kept me functional. On February 3rd, I buried what remained of my documentation. Did it properly this time, hiked deep into state forest land, found a spot near a distinctive rock formation, dug down 4 feet through frozen ground that tore up my hands even through work gloves. The waterproof container held copies of everything: 20 years of feeding logs, growth measurements, behavioral observations, photographs that showed the impossible, a bipedal canid with opposable thumbs and complex tool use. I spoke as I covered it with dirt, not prayer exactly, just words. "I'm sorry, I should have let you die in that ravine, would have been kinder." Faster. Instead, I turned you into a science experiment, made you dependent, took away your freedom because I was curious, because I was lonely, because I convinced myself I was helping. The forest was completely silent. No wind, no birds, just my voice and the sound of frozen dirt falling on sealed plastic. I hope you're still out there. I hope they don't find you. And I hope to God you've forgotten the sound of my truck, forgotten the routine, forgotten that humans can be anything other than a threat. I packed the dirt down, arranged rocks over it in a pattern I'd remember, but anyone else would assume was natural. Then I walked back to my cabin through darkness and cold that felt appropriate. The official finding, when it came 3 weeks later, was delivered by a federal wildlife officer I'd never met. Brief conversation. No details about who'd been on my property or what they'd been looking for. Investigation concluded. No evidence of protected species violations. You're clear. That was it. 20 years reduced to a bureaucratic notation. They never found it. Or if they did, they're not telling me. I sold most of the feeding equipment, kept 1 bucket. Still don't know why. 1 year later, January 2024, sightings started being reported in local hunting forums around November 2023. Nothing official, just rumors, stories from backpackers and deer hunters about tracks too large to identify, sounds in the forest that didn't match known species. One report placed the creature, or something like it, 8 miles northwest of my property. Another mentioned strange vocalizations near the state park boundary. I tracked every mention, mapped locations. Tried to find patterns. The tracks were definitely canid, definitely bipedal. Whether they were from the creature I'd kept for 20 years or something else entirely, I couldn't say. But the possibility that it was still out there, still surviving, kept me going through the worst of the grief. I tried dating one more time. Met someone at a grief support group I'd started attending after my sister died. Ellen, kind woman, understood loss. We dated for 4 months, got close, started spending real time together. Then she said what they always say. "You're trapped by something you won't name. I can feel it. You're not really here with me. Part of you is always somewhere else." She was right. Part of me was still in those woods, still listening for sounds that might indicate survival, still hoping for evidence that 2 decades of secrecy had served some purpose. "I'm sorry," I told her. "You deserve better." "So do you," she said, "but I don't think you believe that." The relationship ended quietly. No drama, just recognition that I was carrying weight I'd never be able to share. My health continued declining. Exhaustion became permanent. I'd wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, replaying every decision, every feeding, every moment I'd chosen this impossible commitment over normal human connection. In June 2024, I collapsed during a volunteer patrol. Woke up in the hospital with doctors explaining that stage 4 colon cancer had metastasized to my liver. inoperable. Treatment would buy time, but not much. I declined aggressive intervention. What was the point? The oncologist suggested hospice planning. You should think about your affairs, get things in order. I nodded, agreed, knew exactly what I needed to do. November 2024, 79 days since diagnosis. My nephew will inherit this property. David, good kid, lives in Minneapolis, doesn't visit often, has no idea what happened in these woods. The will specifies that my personal effects are to be cremated with me. He'll respect that. Won't go through old boxes looking for meaning, but the buried documentation will stay where it is. In 50 years, maybe 100, someone hiking remote state forest might stumble on it, might find waterproof containers with journals and photographs that prove something impossible existed in Wisconsin wilderness. Or maybe no one will. Maybe it'll decompose, forgotten, meaningless. Last night I heard something in the forest, too deep to be a wolf, too structured to be wind. A howl that carried for miles, resonant and mournful. Could have been imagination, could have been wishful thinking, could have been an actual wolf pack, just misidentified by dying man, desperate for meaning. But I don't think so. I sat on my porch until 2 a.m. listening, waiting, hoping. The creature didn't appear, but somewhere in that darkness, something was alive. Something was surviving. If it wanted me dead, I'd be gone. That's what I tell myself. If it had wanted revenge for 20 years of captivity, it could have killed me 100 times over. Could have torn through that cabin door any night it chose. Instead, it stayed. Accepted feeding, developed something that wasn't quite trust, but wasn't pure survival instinct either. What we had, I struggle to name it. Not friendship, not domestication. Something in between that doesn't have a word. I'm dying. The pain is manageable right now with medication, but that won't last. I've got maybe 8 weeks left where I'm functional enough to think clearly. This confession is what I'm leaving behind. Not redemption, not absolution, just documentation. Someone needs to know what I did before it dies with me. Here's what I learned carrying this secret for 21 years. Control is not coexistence. I told myself I was helping. I was studying. I was protecting something rare and valuable from a world that would destroy it. The truth is simpler and uglier. I was lonely. I'd failed at marriage, driven away my son, isolated myself until human connection felt impossible. That creature became my purpose because I didn't have anything else. Feeding it changed its behavior, created dependency where independence should have existed. I conditioned an intelligent apex predator to associate humans with resources, to tolerate proximity, to suppress instincts that had kept its species hidden for thousands of years. That's not protection, that's colonization. In wildlife biology, we know that habituation to humans is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to wild predators. It erodes fear, makes them take risks, gets them killed. If that creature is found, if it approaches humans expecting food or showing reduced wariness, I did that. My 20 years of secret feeding sessions taught it that humans could be something other than threats. Some animals cannot be managed without harm. That's a hard truth. The impulse to help, to intervene, to control. That's human arrogance pretending to be compassion. The creature is still alive. I'm certain of that. Whether it's the only one or part of a breeding population, I don't know. The genetic diversity required to sustain a species long-term suggests there are others, hidden, surviving, maintaining the secrecy that's kept them alive while humans logged and developed and destroyed every other wilderness refuge. My nephew will inherit this land. He'll probably sell it, turn it into hunting property or recreational acreage. New owners will walk these trails, sit in these clearings, never knowing what lived here. That's probably for the best. If you're reading this, if somehow you found the buried documentation, If you've traced the story back to this confession, I have one piece of advice. Leave them alone. Don't report sightings. Don't organize search parties. Don't turn this into a media spectacle or scientific expedition. These creatures have survived by remaining invisible. The moment we discover them officially, they become property. Resources, threats to be managed. The wilderness holds secrets. Some have teeth. Some have intelligence we're not equipped to understand. Some deserve to remain unknown. I'm 71 years old, dying of cancer. No family, no legacy, except this confession. 21 years ago, I found something impossible in a ravine and made the worst decision of my life. I chose secrecy over protocol, curiosity over caution, personal connection over professional responsibility. That choice defined 2 decades. Isolated me from normal human life, created a relationship that had no name and no precedent. I don't know if I'd make a different choice given the chance to start over. That ambivalence probably tells you everything you need to know about moral compromise. The snow's falling outside my window now, same as 21 years ago when I first heard steel cables snapping against flesh, first saw amber eyes tracking my approach through winter darkness. I look out at the forest and wonder, is it out there right now, watching this cabin, remembering the routine we kept for 2 decades? Or has it forgotten completely, returned to pure wilderness, erased every trace of human influence from its behavior? I hope it's the latter, I really do. But late at night, when pain wakes me and medication can't quite reach the depths of what hurts, I hope it's the former. Hope that somewhere in that darkness, something remembers, something knows. The wilderness holds secrets. Some have teeth. This was mine.